Hi, everyone. Welcome to the webinar. My name is Mirabelle Allen. I'm the studio manager at Playform. And today we will be hosting a conversation with Justin Maynard. As a VFX artist and Pratt Institute educator, our guest speaker today, Justin, will walk through Playform techniques for pre-visualization tools that guide your VFX projects, your own VFX style, and expand it using AI capabilities to create one-of-a-kind projects. This webinar will demo Playform using several VFX softwares, including ZBrush, Houdini, and more. For many of you, this will be an introduction to Playform. And before we get started, I want to outline what Playform is and what we do. So Playform empowers artists, creators, and designers to train their own AI with as few as 30 images. We built Playform to make AI accessible to all artists without learning new technical terminology or how to code. Our platform combines visual mediums to generate millions of unique images, serving as a new step in the process of creation. Playform is used by artists throughout their creative process, from the stage of looking for inspiration to preparation of assets, all the way to producing final works. So now I'm excited to introduce Justin. Justin is a Bahamian American artist born in LA, raised in Nassau, Bahamas. He has his bachelor's in philosophy and communications from Boston College. He started out working at the AI lab at MIT, went to complete his MFA in computer graphics and interactive media at Pratt Institute in Brooklyn, New York. As a Brooklyn-based artist for the better part of 2 decades, he has worked in high-end 3D films and commercials and has taught 3D animation and technical courses at School of Visual Arts and Pratt Institute. So we have about 15 minutes at the end of the webinar for Q&A with Justin. Please write your questions in the chat box and Justin will answer them at the end. So everyone, please welcome Justin Maynard.
Thank you. Thank you so much. First, I'd like to say it's a pleasure to be here. I'm so thankful to have the opportunity to work with such talented folks at Playform during the artist residency. It's really been a pleasurable experience because I got to really, test all of the machines in terms of what's possible and in terms of AI and collaboration and thinking about the visual effects pipeline. As Mirabelle said, been sort of working primarily in the New York space, doing films and commercials, and that's been quite fun, as well as teaching by night and sort of working by day, freelancing and with major companies like MPC, The Mill, PsyOp, and Method Studios, and so on, and a number of other smaller shops. So it's been a real pleasure to work with Playform and sort of discover, what's possible in sort of machine learning space. I guess right now I'm going to just share this screen. I'm working on 2 machines here. But essentially what I'd like to talk about is, let's see if I just set this up right quick, share my screen. Okay, cool. So here, this is just sort of a rough breakdown of what we'll be discussing in the context of the residency. If you haven't checked out my page, you can just follow me on Instagram. It's Justiment_823. That's me here. I've been releasing drops in relation to some of the things that we'll be talking about, some of the techniques using Playform in order to create some of these images, and I'll talk about some of those techniques as well. But so the residency for me was really a twofold thing. One was really to just play and explore and see where the tools would sort of take me and how that would influence my process. And that was one aspect. And the second part I can't really talk about because I'm actually, it's leading up to the competition where I'm entering for Ars Electronica. So hopefully I'll be able to release more information about that. But All of these different techniques have been combined together in order to create a large scale project that hopefully I'll be able to reveal later. If you guys, once again, hit me up or follow me on Instagram or, message me. I'm pretty friendly and easygoing. Okay, so in terms of the VFX context, one of the things that we hear a lot about machine learning is that it's a scale multiplier. And essentially, all that is fancy talk for thinking about speed and thinking about bulk workflows and thinking about just a lot of iterations and thinking about time efficiency. And that sort of relates to minimum viable product, which I'll get into shortly. But sort of what we've seen in the space today of machine learning has been a lot of sort of deep fakes. I'm sure many of you have seen famous actors with deep fakes or famous politicians with deep fakes happening and sort of fake videos and that kind of thing. And so I was less interested in that space and I'm more interested in, well, how does this actually apply to everyday sort of CG workflows, VFX, and thinking about art and tech together in order to create, abstract experimental pieces or sculptures and so on. And so I'll be going over some principles in primarily dealing with sort of sculptural workflows in ZBrush, also Houdini, Touch Designer, and a few other software packages like Nuke and so on. But getting back to this concept, this is sort of the major overall principle, or at least how I think about machine learning as I've sort of interfaced with it. It's just really about the minimum viable product, which is essentially thinking about efficient workflows and how to optimize your time and maximize output in order to get, let's say, something in front of a client or in order to get something in front of your creative director relatively fast. So they're already in the feedback loop and then they can comment on things and then you can iterate much faster and push out more work in basically at a faster pace, but it's not necessarily working harder. It's more about working smarter. And so the time that you do spend on something, you're actually leveraging that time and getting sort of, I would think, more value for it. So here, just general concepts. I don't know what everyone's area of expertise is, but this is sort of just a rundown of the a short breakdown of sort of the VFX pipeline. What you'll see is it's not really linear these days. The game changer has been things like The Mandalorian, but for the most part, the standardized pipeline has been, you do some sort of pre-visualization, which includes storyboards, animatics, so on and so forth. And then you have actual sculpts of the assets or sets or characters. And then you can take those 3D maquettes and then you turn them into 3D models and so on. And then you think about topology, which is just dealing with construction and flow, a data flow as it relates to things like texturing or assigning textures and then setting it up for rigging, which is just character controls to set it up for animation. And then once in the animation process, we're essentially just breathing life into the characters in order to have a nice performance. And then you have lighting, and then you process it with rendering, and then you bring it into a compositing package and a finishing product. So what I'll be looking at today is essentially talking about elements of previs, sculpture, but I was also really excited about the opportunity of exploring a new aesthetic. And so what I think is going to happen ultimately, if it hasn't already, is every single part of the pipeline that we can envision is going to be influenced on some level with machine learning if it's not influenced already. And the great thing about Playform is they're actually doubling down on artists, and there's a nice sort of symbiosis where you can have a conversation with the engineers and they're taking these things into consideration in terms of, well, what does that future look like when you integrate machine learning with artists and thinking about tools for the future. And so that's been really awesome. working with them in that context, because I've seen other machine learning things, but it's not quite the same sort of feedback and collaborative element as I've seen here. So once again, thanks again. And so here, these are some of the things we'll be looking at today. Sort of previs sculptural workflow using FaceMix and back into a 3D package called ZBrush, thinking about sketch and FaceMix, as well as some photography, thinking about the machine learning and how you can use photography inputs to generate pre-visualization ideas that then led me, for example, to do like a dino sculpt sketch and variations. And then using, after that, we'll go into sort of examples of, compositing and touch designer and Nuke, and thinking about new aesthetics, thinking about style transfer and so on and so forth. So I'll get right into it. That's sort of just the basic sort of overview of how I've been thinking about machine learning process. So the first thing is let's close this out. I'm going to open up ZBrush. I've got a few programs open here just so that they're ready to go. I'm going to open up ZBrush. And the ZBrush, for those of you who may not know, it's essentially a 3D sculpting program. And one of the things I've been interested in is, well, how can we toy with FaceMix and can we, actually play with photographs, and then can we actually upload sculptures to generate and then mix and match with different photographs to get different sort of character stylizations, bring those back down, and then have that influence sort of the pipeline in terms of how I'm working with sculpts within the context of ZBrush. So here, for example, is, let's say, this is just a demo head straight out of the package, right? And so in this context, I was thinking, all right, let's see, as an example, if I were to bring this up into Playform and using FaceMix as a technique to explore, essentially, here you can come to a mix, right? And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to create a new project. I've uploaded a bunch of sculpts that we'll look at, but this will just give you just a quick idea of what it takes in terms of the process to upload one of these things. And so here, I'm just going to roll down. Let's try a mix. And I'm just going to, this is just a quick video that explains the process. There's no need for me to go into that since I'm pretty well aware. So here you start out with a grid. And in this context, since I took a render of that image, and I can now access that image, and you'll see all of these random sculpts here. But this is the one that I uploaded. And essentially what I want to do is let's see, I've got my Zoom interface in the way here. Let me dock that. So I'm going to create a new face mix. So this is that face. If we go back quickly to ZBrush, this is what Playform's machine learning output of that face, that facial upload. And so here, instantly, you can see that now we go from a grayscale model to some sort of colorized version and variations. What's wonderful here is basically I can even begin to visualize what the end product might be. When we talk about minimum viable product, I'm visualizing what the end product might be before I go in and do all these detailing, texturing, and so on and so forth. So at this point, we can invite like an art director or creative director or client, depending upon who you're working with or for. And you can add feedback into the process before you go on and do all of the rest of the work with paint and sculpture and detailing and so on. So in this context, let's say I want to add, let's say, another character from this whole database here. Let's just do some random sort of extremes, right? So I'm just going to use her, and which this way we can get a sense of what this looks like live. And I already have a few things set up to basically demo, but this will give you an idea of what's happening here. So dock this to the side. So you can see here, I can select any number of these faces, right? You can also, maybe at this point, the client would say, hey, that's the one, or hey, no, maybe what about that famous actor? Can you download a photo and upload? Certainly you can do that. You can also, upload personal photos or whatever and do mixes and blends of sculptures and photos and so on. And so this was really cool to me, the very idea that you can upload a sculpture and then have that be sort of influenced with an amalgamation of different photos. And then we can download these different outputs and then use it back into ZBrush, and then maybe do additional renders and upload. And so you have this sort of recursive feedback loop that you could almost do infinitely. So here I'm just going to show you just another example of, let's say we just added, something else to the mix. Let's add, right? I'm thinking about contrast here just so you can see, right? So contrast in age, contrast in gender, just so that you can see like how robust the model is, and you can basically switch it around. And what I would do is at this point with my sculptures, I would say, hey, I don't want the grayscale to influence the model as much. So I would change the color texture down to 0. So we're changing the weight of the influence as it pertains to that, that output. And then here I can just hit regenerate. And then now we're going to see essentially morphs between these different targets, right? What's cool about this process too is you can also generate animations and so on from each of these targets, from this target to another target. I'm not going to demo that here, but just as an example, if I wanted to do that, I can save this sculpt. I can also save this, a baby photo, and that's all docked here in my saved items for that project. And then I can also click on video and then begin morphing between targets. But in this case, what I want to do is just demonstrate, okay, let's say, all right, they love this, or the client loves this, or I love this, and the creative director loves this. And then we can now up-res this image, or we can use it as is. And by default, it's 1024 by 1024, but you can also upscale the texture to different resolutions. So 2048 by 2048 or 4096 by 4096. And this case, this is sufficient just for demoing what I want to do with it. So I'm just going to exit upscaling. I just want you to know that it's there. So I'm going to hit download, and I'm just going to save that to my project and show you how I might actually work with this in the context of ZBrush. So here I have just a little demo head folder, and I'm going to call this, Mix 311. And I'm now going to go back to ZBrush. Now here I'm in the context of ZBrush, and what I want to do is ultimately bring in that texture. If I go to my texture palette here, and I import my path, and this was the last one, Mix 311. So if I open this one up, we don't see it yet, but if I go to texture, and I select it, and I add it to Spotlight, what that enables me to do is manipulate this image, machine learning output. And right now it's obvious that the scale doesn't match, but we have tools to work with that and sort of scale and bring it down relative to the actual sculpture itself. And once, I can turn this on and off by scaling in the opacity and so on. But I just want to give you a quick idea of some of the techniques that I was using so that you can kind of understand how I was relating to the tools. So basically I can fade this in and out. At this point, I can also modify the model. I can also modify this image to fit better on the head, but I'm just sort of trying to get a relatively decent lineup with the nose and the eyes, for example. And let's say I'm happy with that. What I would then do, let's see, let's turn back up the opacity. What I would then do is select the appropriate brush and change my spotlight radius. So now I have a brush setting. And if I start to paint, you notice what it's doing is actually doing a Z influence. What I want to do is paint just the actual color from there. So I'm just going to fill this object, and then I can begin painting directly on the surface right now. And now I'm just painting a texture, a base texture on this model, and I can just really block in things really relatively fast just to get a general idea. But one of the things with ZBrush is you want to pay attention to the actual level of vertices or your active points. Right now, I don't have enough data to actually to show that painting on the level of detail that I would want it. So I would basically up the level of active points by hitting Control D. We're now in the millions of points because the way ZBrush works, it actually assigns RGB values or color values to actual points or active points on the sculpt. And now you can see even the wrinkles and so on are coming in, details and stuff of the hair, right? And so that's a lot different than where we were before. Now, one of the immediate limitations is if we're projecting from the front, we have issues with stretching from the sides, which will become much more apparent once I start to turn the model around, right? But even then, just to give you an idea of workflows, I'm here, I can color pick off that other texture and then sort of begin painting in based on that color. If I get rid of spotlight now, I can actively pick here and start, coloring in this model. And so I'm just and since I have symmetry on, I'm painting just on roughly one side, and that's mirroring on the other. And so right now, that's just one aspect of the texture process. If I wanted to do the eyes, what I would also mention is that it's worth doing is once you set this up, it's also a great idea to go to the movie region, set your timeline to show, and you can drop down keyframes, right? So if I started working from a specific 3/4, now I can go back and forth between different sort of views relatively easy that I blocked in with the camera. So now I'm going to let's see if I can get the eyes in. All right, and so this, to give you an idea, this is really fast, as I just demoed within a few minutes. After my sculpts, we can sort of block down and sort of lock down some paint on a character. I can then sort of kick this out and do some stills, and even from this distance or this range, I can kick out a few stills and then begin sort of further concepting it. Or I can do many more different variations based off of client feedback. So when we think about the context of visual effects and minimum viable product, what we're thinking about is ultimately saving time. So I can basically probably do 5 or 6 versions that reasonably pass, right, in terms of quality for a given direction, and just to get feedback, which then changes the direction. And the more iterations we do, the more feedback we can get in the process to basically leverage that information to basically have a much more efficient workflow. And so this is how I was ultimately thinking of it in the context of ZBrush and then uploading and downloading. You can also re-render this, which might be really interesting, and then kick that out as well to FaceMix. So I can go to render, essentially find my render passes, and here I have the render composite. I can save that and then re-upload that version. And so the way I was thinking about how we relate to Playform or machine learning and artificial intelligence is this sort of discourse and a feedback, a collaboration, where you can essentially jump in at any given point, use machine learning in the process, kick it back out, bring it back down. And so it's just going to be really interesting how people are going to sort of use these tools and then how they inform your own workflows as well. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up a version of this that I have worked on previously with another face, and that's this head here. And so this will give you an idea of just within a very short time span that you can essentially kick out many different variations and work on different versions, right, of the same character, right, which ultimately is the same sculpt but different painting variations of the same sculpt. But not only that, is if you change the faces, you can also alter the sculpt underneath in order to have several different versions of a character. And so this was just using the demo head as an example. What's also common in ZBrush is we can start sculpting from just base shapes, right? And using different techniques, you can start sort of sculpting forms here just by using curves and so on in order to sort of clip different surfaces. And so what I'll show you is different variations of other sculptures, right, that I've been using. And here you can build and sort of work a model up and down until you get it where the base level mesh needs to be. And so this is sort of a really crude demo of some of the process to basically arrive at a half decent sculpt in order to upload. So what I'll do now is show you some of those sculptures. So here under upload, you'll see a lot of these grayscale characters. All of these, I was testing different variations. So what I want to do is show you these different variations here. So these were sort of really showing you that process where you can get in there and you can begin sculpting. I'm not going to demo all the sculpture stuff, but literally these are just very quick variations, like 5-minute to 10-minute sort of block-ins of characters and faces, and just to see what kind of outputs that we would get. So this character here, uploaded through sculpture to machine learning, actually generated a face like this, which can then be mixed with a variety of different faces and so on, and tweaked to get further examples. So this character's face here ended up being this face here, right? And notice this, like how I sort of treated, I was just blocking in the shape. These were just very rough, hard sort of edges, but just blocking in the character's shape. And give you an idea, if I can come in with this and then have this inform another sculpture by just adding that or creating a new mix, right? So we're just going to create a new mix from scratch, and just to show you what that might look like. If I add to this mix, I can add other uploads. So let's even add this character here that we were working off of. So as I add this as an anchor image, notice we now have, based off of this character, machine learning gives us all of these different outputs, and I can begin to sort of visualize what this sculpt is actually going to look like in that context. And I can also, right, once again, take off the color here, influence, and I would normally add, another character just to see like maybe a certain skin tone or certain values or attributes and so on and so forth to basically blend between to do different variations. And so this was really exciting to me as somebody who not only am I an effects TD, but I'm also a generalist. And so doing, ZBrush sculptures like this, it becomes just a really sort of informative process and almost just visualizing the end before you even create the product itself. And without, you know, all of the labor, you can actually influence the direction. So here, if let's say I like this one, same principle, and that becomes my target, I can download that and then begin working with that in the sculptural context within ZBrush. And so like I said, like that's been really exciting, sort of learning that not only am I sort of working with these tools, but they're also influencing my workflow and how I'm thinking about future work with the tools, and how that's going to actually change and become much more innovative. And hopefully I can leverage my time a lot better by using machine learning throughout the sculpting process. And speaking of, I'm going to show you another project that was sort of generated initially by training a model. And if I go to the Explore page, was by training a model off of certain data. If you come to this Explore page, you'll see the gallery. This is some of the work here featured. These are some of the pieces featured that hopefully I'll get to talk about as well. But if you come down, scroll down, there's this little character here. And this to me was an interesting surprise, because what I did was essentially I trained a model based off of a number of different photographs. So a number of different photographs from, I'll show you the inputs here, but basically macro and micro photography, a number of different things from like reptiles, skin, you name it, like mushrooms, just basic textures of and different, even a pomegranate in here, and just random data that I found that I thought was beautiful. And this was essentially the output of all of that. And so what I found interesting here is that this starts to look like some sort of version of a dinosaur to me, right? So now not only did we start off with the photographs and random sort of things that texturally I found interesting, but then it started to suggest, you know, a direction perhaps that I should go with it. And so this struck me as some sort of like an alien creature or alien dinosaur of some sort. And so what I did was in ZBrush, I'll show you in a second, what I did was essentially work on taking that image down and using that in context of ZBrush, and starting out with photographs from machine learning, training that, bringing that image down, and then began to sculpt, right, a profile off of that photograph, right? So here, if we now bring in, if I import that texture, right, here I have it already in my setup. So I imported it, and now I'm going to click it on, add it to Spotlight. And here, similar principle, right, as I sort of demoed before, you can lock in, and then you kind of basically have to position the image right over your target correctly. And then once you get that going, right, what I'm going to do is then change the radius, right? And then let's say I block this in a lot nicer, but then I can begin, right, painting on the surface. And very quickly, right, notice my lineup is off. So let's sort of sort of position it, right? And let's try that. But very quickly, you can see that I can begin sort of painting on the surface and tweaking that actual surface. And then thinking of it in the context of how fluid this might be to go from photographs to a visualization, and then bring that back down, have that influence a sculpt, and then also influence the texture on that sculpt, and then essentially project the texture onto the sculpt in terms of painting. And as you can see, if we go back to this project, there's like multiple variations, right? And these can also be animated and be output as small animations. But what I was interested in is sort of taking this data and actually thinking about that in a sculptural context. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up sort of a part of the process where I'm a little bit further along, just to show you. So here, there's the DynoSculpt version 2. And what I also found really interesting about it is as we consider, right? So here's a little bit more polished version. And like literally this took me about sort of 5 minutes to block in. And we have, you know, a variation of a dyno. Now, keep in mind, this is not going to hold up texturally sort of super close and it's not that detailed, but the idea, right? Keep in mind as we're thinking, or at least in terms of the way I was thinking about machine learning in this context is the minimum viable product. So I can get different variations out in sort of rapid succession. And let's say a client wants, hey, I need 5 dinosaurs, right? And so I can give 5 variations relatively fast instead of spending time being fixated on, you know, the wonderful details of it all. But here I get sort of the detail and a good look to sort of establish whether the client would sign off on a certain direction. So here, what's also really cool is if we look at this, there's also all sorts of really wonderful and intricate detailing here that can also be used in terms of not just the painting of the sculpture, but also in terms of influencing the actual displacement of the actual of the vertices of the sculpture. And so, for example, what I can do is I can use that texture, I can bring in a texture and use it as an alpha, or I can use that to sort of tweak surfaces on the actual model. So here, if I bring in a new texture, and these were all textures that were generated from that same set. So here's an example of, this looks like sort of a crocodile skin variation. And so here I can bring in this texture, select this one, and add it to Spotlight rather, right? And so now I can begin either painting similarly on the surface, or instead I can just actually use it to influence the, right, how I'm actually pulling off of that surface to generate deformations in the surface. But once again, I'm considering the amount of active points, right? It's not high enough to get the level of data that I want. So here I'm going to say around, let's say 2 million, right? And now we can start to see sort of details emerging, right? So you can begin painting on that surface as well. Another technique that was pretty cool in relation to this is thinking about surfacing and using surface noise is to get like overall general variations. So I could pull in and use any of these images as an alpha to basically apply onto the actual surface, right? To push it a little bit further. So it's using this image here as an alpha. And if I don't want to mix it with noise, but I can change the scale of this, I'm going to increase the strength so that we can see exactly what's going on in the surface. Let me increase the strength a little bit further. But this gives you an idea that now we can start to bring in detailing on top of this surface in order to push it a little bit further and give it a nicer sort of render or a look. And once I like that, I can hit OK, and I'm going to apply, right? So I hit OK, and now I can bake that into the model itself. So you can, as you can imagine, from a sculpting standpoint, I got really excited about all of this stuff because it lends itself nicely to, wait a minute, I can iterate super fast. Once again, thinking about minimum viable product, which means I'm going to save time. As an experienced, visual effects artist, I don't want to go down a certain direction without approval from a client or approval from a creative director, and then lose all that time if they say, no, I wasn't thinking about that. Why didn't you do it this direction, right? So it allows you to sort of improve workflows and get to a certain target much faster based on these feedback loops. And so that, I got really excited about that, thinking about that in context. So here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hide that, and I'm going to go to a later version just to give you an idea of so that just gives you an idea of the workflow, and all of these things can be reusable, and you can do different variations, right, of the same model, and then even tweak the model itself or the base model. Keep the paint, tweak the base model, and then actually modify the surfacing, right? And so this gives you an idea. Yep, it doesn't hold up if you zoom in super close, but from a distance, right? And if we render that, or I can kick this out now to Photoshop, render it, and then begin painting, and then using that in terms of the creative process and going back and forth between 2D, 3D, machine learning, and almost this like sort of infinite loop. So let's see. So in terms of the workflow there, that's what's been, I've been really excited about that sculpturally. As I was saying before, what I want to do now is sort of have a look at, we did these three different variations. I'm going to start to think about a touch designer and sort of Nuke. As I said before, I was thinking about sort of style transfer, thinking about different images and workflows in terms of creating a new aesthetic. And if you go to my Instagram page, you can check a lot of this stuff out later, but there's a lot of animations that are generated based specifically on some of the techniques that I'm going to show you here. But keep in mind that as I show you these techniques, there is the actual, there's actually, I think it'll step, it won't be fluid in terms of the actual speed, right? So if it's live, like on Instagram, it's different. For some reason on Zoom, a lot of the animations won't come across, but this will give you the general sort of concept. So here in Nuke, just to give you an idea, I was toying with some style transfers from machine learning. And I will sort of demonstrate, let's see if I can play through this, if this holds up. Yeah, and so you can see right now what I'm doing is just a sort of 2021 stamp. And this is actually animating in between my style of watercolor use on a style transfer machine learning, as well as markers and different sort of variations. But not only that, is it's using a machine learning paint algorithm that I use in order to mix. So to explain that a little bit, or elaborate a little bit further on that, we have this node tree, and I'll show you just different variations and how that begins to relate to photography and so on. So here's a style transfer. Here's another style transfer in the style of Klimt, right? Gustav Klimt. Here's a style transfer of a self-portrait in the style, in my style, generated from a sketchbook. And here, if we go further down the node tree, this gives you an example of, and right on your screen right now, it's probably coming across really steppy, but it's superbly fluid on my screen. But if you picture sort of, because I was interested in watercolors and sort of like watercolor like transitions. And so what that's doing is it's taking different variations of like I said before, machine learning outputs, like this output that I generated, which is based on some fluid paint that was then uploaded to Playform, and then in the one of the training algorithms, I exported and I got this output, and then I brought this back in, and now what I'm doing is I'm literally mixing in between these three style variations using the red, green, and blue as separate channels. So that's creating this mix here in order to generate this different style, which becomes its own sort of hybrid style, right? And here, similar process, right? Three separate styles, one sort of ink monotone. The other is sort of dealing with different ink markings with color and sort of cross hatching and contour hatching. And then the photograph itself and sort of morphing in between those styles using similar technique. And very quickly, once again, because I have, I'm thinking, procedurally and thinking about workflows, is there's nothing stopping me from generating other different styles and then creating multiple different outputs relatively fast. And this is sort of what I was referring to before in terms of the industry, people calling it a scale multiplier. And so I can take one photograph, do several different variations, and immediately have, like 5 different, animations just based on this one tree or this one setup. And so that's another variation. Let's see if I have another one in here. Yeah. And just another variation here in terms of thinking about the aesthetic and then animating between those three. And so I was really excited about that as well, as you can imagine, because one of my main goals was to figure out, well, wait a minute, how can I push machine learning and in order to influence my workflow so that I can generate a new aesthetic and ultimately, I've been pretty happy with the results because very fast, you can iterate, you can change direction, and you can actually update and put, let's say, animated GIFs on a website, or you can, create your own installations or video installation projects. Also social media. This allows you to scale up in order to do work and post on social media in a timely fashion. And so that's what I've been doing here as for part of the process, is thinking about how all of these things are interrelated, and then using style transfer and different aspects of this in order to generate these animations in a timely manner on the fly and then sort of post. Let's see. And so we have, let's see, another sort of use case scenario. And the reason why I'm kind of ultimately all over the place is, like, as I said, as a generalist, not only just an effects TD, but a generalist and been working in the industry. I think a lot about flow and data and things going from, okay, texture to sculpture, and from sculpture to particles, and then from particles, maybe that's obviously back into like video format, which is 2D, which then can be pushed up to Playform, which then can be brought back down. And so, like, I'm thinking about how all of these tools essentially can be used in different contexts. And that's what really gets me excited about working with machine learning and Playform. So here, to give you another example of a use case, I can show you, this is Touch Designer. And what I'm going to do is just show you essentially, right? This is actually machine learning. You can't really see it real time as is. But what it's doing is it's stepping through this is machine learning texture brought down into 3D and then generating particle simulations off of that texture in order to create a video motion. Right now, it looks like it's stepping through Zoom, but essentially, if you can picture some sort of morphing fluid form, and it's much more flowing than it is apparent here. And I'll probably post this later on so that you guys can take a look as well. But so I was thinking not only of sculpture, images, but particle simulations, and then how that relates to the process. I was also interested in cubism. And so what I ended up doing was actually I ended up working in Houdini, and I would take, like, I'm fascinated by portraits, right? So I would take, basic sculptures like this, that I did in ZBrush, and then using my own sort of fracturing techniques, and a little bit of code, essentially sort of fracturing this object, right? These different heads, and then exporting them and slapping projections on top, right? If I just show you that this is here is 3D, right? So these are all different cuts of the same face, but then I would also push that back up to Playform, right? And I'm going to show you sort of one of the projects in relation to that. See if I go to the training set. So and so here you can get an idea of, like, I just got really excited. I started slamming the machine and basically uploading tons and tons and tons of data, because I really wanted to take advantage of the opportunity in order to basically sort of demonstrate, what was capable, because I was also excited about what's happening in this space. And I think a lot of people might be slightly, okay, here it is. A lot of people might be slightly intimidated because they think of machine learning as sort of like an instant automation. But what I like to think about it is, it sort of is in alignment with Playform's philosophy, is thinking about artists in the space and them actually collaborating with the AI in order to generate some more efficient workflows. And so that's where I really feel like the future is headed, is how do you actually collaborate with a machine, and how does that influence your process? And so these are some of the sculptures examples that I was showing you that were cut 3D style and then sort of pushed up through Playform. And now using videos, I can implement and create a whole different sort of array of animations. And I can show you, I think, in Touch Designer here, I think I got, if I don't, I can load it in a second. But that's sort of how I was sort of thinking about the workflow, is how do I leverage all of these different tools to come up with these different results. And as I open this up, how are we doing with time, Mirabel? Are we good? Or
We're going to start question and answer pretty soon, as soon as you're ready. So,
okay, cool. Let me just let's see if I can just open this one last thing just to get that in. But yeah, I can't even go over all of it, but I'm just giving you sort of a general sort of an idea of some of the things that I've been sort of working on. And yeah, it feels like it's a very exciting time to be involved with machine learning and thinking about visual effects, and being an artist that hopefully has some say in how these tools are created and how they can be implemented with artists, right? And so here's an example of using an amalgamation of compositing techniques, some of the fracturing techniques that I just briefly went over in Houdini. So, here I've Statue of Liberty, sort of fractured outputs pushed up, and then with my sort of 3D fractured outputs and animations all coming back in a composite to do an experimental piece that I just sort of packaged today just to sort of demonstrate sort of how fast some of this stuff is, because essentially once you create several sets, they're all sort of building blocks that come together. I think of them as sort of modular structures, kind of like Lego, right? So you have these building blocks and they can be used in different ways and manipulated in different ways to create many other different projects and other different outputs. And so that part too, I also really find fascinating. And so with that, I'll probably, just want to wrap before we get into questions, just by saying, thank you again to the Playform team. It's been really, a pleasure working with you, and I look forward to working with you guys, you folks in the future. And, if any of you have any questions as well that we can't get into on this talk, please feel free to reach out to me on Instagram. We are in discussion in terms of doing tutorials, and what format that takes is not quite yet decided, but there might be a class, a follow-up class, and talking about some of these techniques. And if enough of you are interested, then we could sort of structure a course around that. And I'm also considering doing a YouTube channel and so on. But thank you all for the opportunity to present and the opportunity to share. And if you have any questions, feel free to shoot.
Great. Thank you so much, Justin. That was really informative and wonderful. So we're just going to get into some questions now. There's just a couple. So Heidi asked, this is blending of the human forms with those textures. Very cool. I think that what she was referencing was you were showing the dinosaur. Heidi, you can correct me if I'm wrong. But Justin, is this blending the human forms with textures, or can you elaborate on that question?
Um, so in the context of the dinosaur, that was blending literally micro photography. So everything under that I thought was interesting, sort of mathematically and visually, from mushrooms to let's say textures of reptiles. And then I just downloaded the outputs and then painted those outputs back onto the sculpture itself. If you're referring to the human characters, um, ultimately what that was doing was taking outputs of these different human faces that were generated and then download those outputs and then use those outputs as sort of projections back onto the sculptured surface. So I hope that answers the
Great.
question.
Thank you. And then Matt also asks, is Playform only for 2D animations?
Um, that's an interesting question. I would say no right off the bat. I think ultimately what's happening is in this space is there's talk about how do we integrate and how do we expand the tool set to be much more accommodating for everybody. And quite frankly, everybody can use it at this point now. You have 2D animation outputs, but like I was just demonstrating, you can take those 2D outputs um, and use them as texture inputs and generate 3D outputs. So like all of this is 3D, even here in the background, right? Ultimately, this is also 3D, but then it's now being used as an animation in 2D because it's being rendered back to 2D form. But yeah, you can wrap these textures on 3D surfaces and leave them in 3D and do sort of virtual reality fly-throughs. And in fact, some of the Playform collaborators have done just that.
Lastly, Heidi asks, what free tools would you recommend if we can't afford some of these tools? Um, Before you answer that question, I just wanted to say that new users of Playform get $15 in free credits, and there are 3 different types of subscription. So please check out the website at create.playform.io to see what is most reasonable for you as a creator. Justin?
Okay, that's a great question. And so we're also thinking about, accessibility in the space of design and visual effects. Um, there are a lot of one example of a free software is Blender, right? So there are a lot of these sculptural techniques. Don't think of it in terms of the package necessarily, right? Think of it in terms of what's possible, and then is there like a software that's available that you can use and sort of do these techniques. So Blender is available for free. A lot of these software packages, you can download with student licenses and experiment and play. So a lot of these tools are accessible, even if you don't, if you have a small budget or less, or none, quite frankly. So I would these days, specifically me as somebody who also loves teaching, like I also think about accessibility as being a very important point. But don't get locked into any sort of one tool. That's kind of why you see me also jumping. There's something to be said for delving into one software package to the point where you know it, like you feel like you're an expert, but focus on the principles, because the principles transcend the software packages. So when I show you a principle like, oh, you can actually project this texture back on a 3D surface, that can be done in any 3D package that's within reason, right? So most 3D packages already have that type of access. I hope that answers that question.
So, thank you so much, guys, for these questions, and thank you for joining us. Justin, thank you so much for this wonderful intro to VFX and Playform. Oh, awesome. Yeah, so Justin, do you want to say what you're showing?
Yeah, and right now I'm just using Touch Designer to sort of demonstrate how I can basically toggle back and forth with the live camera, um, and basically tweak different variations. And these are machine learning outputs that I've downloaded and composited now with my live feed and the camera. So just to give you an idea that there's also applications that are going to be really exciting in terms of how you can apply this to interactive spaces. And if you think about, maybe performative arts like dance and installation and so on and so forth, there are lots of other elements that are opened up and are available because of it. So I just wanted to kind of also just quickly demo that.
Awesome. So I mentioned it in the chat a couple of times, but please follow Justin on Instagram. His Instagram is Justimin_823, right? That's your Instagram?
Yeah,
And
Justin_823. Yep.
excellent. And also, please give us a follow on Instagram at Playform. You can also go to create.playform.io to get started. Like I said, new users get $15 in free credits of training. You can play with it, experiment, see if it's something that you would be interested in your VFX career. And thank you so much for joining us. This live stream will also be on YouTube. So thank you. And we look forward to connecting with you further, Justin.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Thanks.